What if one of the biggest, most gut-wrenching objections to a loving God is actually based on a huge misunderstanding of what justice even is? We're going to tackle a question that for a lot of people is a massive stumbling block for their faith. It's the problem of ultimate evil, and it usually gets boiled down to one name: Hitler. The so-called Hitler objection to the idea that maybe, just maybe, everyone is eventually saved.
And when you ask a question like this, let's be real. Our first gut reaction is no way. Absolutely not, right? The whole idea just feels wrong, like a total violation of justice. But what if our whole idea of what God's justice looks like is, well, incomplete? The argument we're about to explore doesn't ask us to excuse evil. Not at all. It actually asks us to dig deeper into a vision of God that might be, believe it or not, more just. And yeah, that's the paradox we're jumping into.
Okay, so check this out. This is where it gets wild, because it completely flips the script on what you'd expect. The traditional view, the one that most people think is all about justice, it actually has this kind of shocking get-out-of-jail-free card. Think about it. If Hitler had a quick last-second moment of real repentance, boom, he's in heaven. No consequences. But the universalist view, the one everyone says is too soft, it says nope, no way. It argues that no one, and I mean no one, escapes judgment.
So, who really gets away with it? To even begin to unpack this, we've got to shift gears a little. We have to move past that initial gut reaction and look at the actual logic behind it. See, the real question here isn't if evil gets punished. The question is, what's the point of the punishment?
And here's the key thing to get. Christian Universalism is all about judgment. It's all about accountability. There are absolutely massive consequences for sin. But, and this is a huge but, it sees that judgment as having a purpose. It's not just about endless punishment for the sake of punishment. No, it's seen as this intense, painful, purifying process that's actually designed to restore a soul, to bring it back to where it belongs.
And we actually have a perfect example of this right in the Bible. The Apostle Paul. This was a guy who was actively hunting down and killing Christians. He even called himself the chief of sinners, the worst of the worst. And yet, he had one of the most incredible turnarounds in all of history. So the logic goes, if God's transforming power is big enough for him, for the self-proclaimed worst sinner, then what's the limit? Is there anyone who is truly beyond that kind of transformation?
All right, now to really get our heads around this idea of justice that restores, we have to talk about one of the most loaded symbols in the whole Bible: fire. What if we've been thinking about it all wrong? What if fire isn't just about torture for a few unlucky souls, but it's actually about purification for everyone? Jesus himself says it. He says, everyone will be salted with fire. Just let that sink in. Everyone. He doesn't say some people or the really bad people. He says everyone. That sounds less like a threat for a specific group and more like a fundamental spiritual reality, right? Like this fire is just part of the process for all of us.
So what exactly is this fire?
Well, the Bible literally says that God himself is a consuming fire. So just being in God's presence is being in the fire. Now, how you experience that fire, that depends entirely on you. If you're aligned with God, it feels like warmth, like light. But if you're clinging to all your junk, to your sin, that same holy presence feels like an unbearable, burning judgment that just incinerates everything that's false about you. So yeah, maybe hell isn't a location, but an experience. The experience of a soul that isn't ready for the unfiltered presence of pure love.
And that's what that fire creates. Not screams of pain from some torture chamber, but that deep, internal agony. The weeping and gnashing of teeth that comes from finally seeing yourself and what you've done with total clarity. It's the horror of realizing the truth. And it's awful, for sure. But it's also the necessary first step. It's the only ground where real, genuine change can actually begin to grow.
Paul lays this out so clearly. He talks about a judgment where all your life's work, the wood, hay, and stubble, gets burned up. But here's the kicker. Even if everything you built turns to ash, he says the person themselves will be saved. Saved, but like someone escaping through the flames. You see? The fire destroys the sinful stuff, the false identity. It doesn't destroy the actual person.
This idea that the fire burns away the false self, this is really the heart of the whole thing. It gets into this concept of sanctification, which basically draws a hard line between the person God made you to be and the sinful junk persona you built on top of that.
And this right here is the most important point to get. The whole Hitler in heaven objection comes from this image of an unrepentant monster just strolling through the pearly gates. But that's not what's being argued at all. The Universalist view is that the Nazi part of Hitler, the tyrant, the monster, that's the very thing that the fire of God's love is meant to completely and utterly destroy.
So what does that actually look like? Well, you can kind of see it as a process. First comes the confrontation, that awful moment of facing the full horror of what you've done. Then the purification begins, where God's consuming love just burns away all that wood, hay, and stubble. That fire leads to the annihilation of the sinful self, what the Bible calls the old man. And only after all of that is gone, only then can the final stage happen, the restoration of the true self, the person God intended all along.
So you see, the Hitler that might be in heaven is, well, he isn't the Hitler we know. He's a completely transformed being, one who would look back at what he did with absolute loathing and horror. He'd be the child of God that was buried under all that evil, finally restored to who he was originally created to be.
So where does all this lead? What's the final picture this theology is painting? It's a vision that's bigger than just saving a few individuals here and there. It's about the ultimate restoration of everything. It's a hope you can trace all the way through the Bible, from the very beginning to the very end.
So let's just boil it down. In this view, God's judgment isn't about getting even. It's about making things right. It's restorative. The whole story of the Bible points toward the restoration of all things, not eternal separation. And probably most important, God doesn't play favorites. His mercy is for everyone. It's a love that just doesn't give up until every last one is brought home.
Paul puts it in this absolutely stunning way. He says, "For God has consigned all to disobedience, so that he may have mercy on all." It's like this incredible divine jujitsu move, you know? He uses the universal problem, everyone's disobedience, as the very reason for the universal solution, having mercy on everyone. The all of our mess is completely swallowed up by the all of his mercy.
So that leaves us with a pretty challenging thought to chew on. If God really is like a loving parent who never ever gives up, and if judgment is actually a fire that purifies instead of just tortures, what does that do to our whole idea of justice? Does it make justice weaker? Or does it reveal a kind of justice that is so much stronger, so much bigger, and so much more hopeful than we ever dared to imagine?